Joining us on the line now, Dan Bongino, former Secret Service agent, author of the book Inside the Bubble. Thought it a good day to have him. Based on what happened at the White House yesterday, if you haven't heard, a small drone flew into the White House property about 3 a.m. yesterday morning, caused quite a stir. Secret Service went on high alert. Fire department, police officials were called into the area around the White House. Quite a little scramble there for a little bit. We've learned a bit more about that. But, Dan, I guess my question is this something that the Secret Service has had concern about for some time?
You know, it is, Brian, and it's not just the Secret Service. There are a number of folks in the DOD and the Pentagon who are worried about this as well. Listen, you have experience with drones. You know better than anyone. Matter of fact, I was actually talking about you yesterday with one of your former media colleagues who flies them as well. And some of these drones out there can carry, 20 and 30 pounds. Yeah. Just imagine that with Semtex or some kind of plastic explosive, God forbid, flown over the White House grounds and landed on the south or north lawn. You'd have a disaster. This is a very big deal.
Yeah, let me just say that this particular drone is a DJI Phantom 1. It costs about, right now, it's sort of about 18 months old in technology, which is, a lot of improvement since then. You can get them for about $400. They carry about a payload of about a pound is the most they can carry. Right. So this is not a heavy lift vehicle, and it didn't have a camera. And we now know that a government employee, for some unknown reason, was up at 3 a.m. flying his drone not far from the White House and says it was all an accident. Do you buy all that?
The 3 a.m. thing just seems to me kind of weird, and conveniently right on the south grounds near the ellipse where probably nobody's really looking for you at that time. I find that kind of odd.
With a snowstorm pending. As far as we knew, it was going to dump about 4 inches of snow in the next 5 hours.
Yeah, I mean, Larry, Brian, you and I are both thinking at 3 o'clock in the morning during the 3-foot blizzard of 2015, let's go out and fly a drone near the White House. Come on. But the reason this thing is such a scary problem for the Secret Service is, think about this, guys. Transportation devices that can transport either camera equipment or weapons are always a big deal. Planes, trains, automobiles, always. With planes, you obviously have some warning. We have a pretty good system there, but there'd have to be a hijacking, God forbid, or something like that to impact the White House. With a car, we've already shut down Pennsylvania Avenue, and the offset on the south grounds is pretty substantial. With a drone, you have no warning at all. I mean, you have a device that's hard to detect on radar because it's easy to confuse with birds and pigeons. And if it's on the surveillance mode instead of carrying a weapon, you have some of these drones that are, they're looking at making them like mosquitoes, like little insects. I mean, this is a really, really big deal, and they're going to have to think of something to mitigate this threat.
So Dan, what? There you go. So what do they think of? I mean, short of enclosing the White House and its grounds within a impenetrable plexiglass bubble, what can be done to stop something like this from happening?
Well, once it's happened, you're not going to stop it, and that's the problem. The only way they can attack this problem, and if I was up there in the Secret Service 8th floor headquarters, where all the supervisors are, I would say you'd have to attack this on the communication side. There's no other way. Those devices, as Brian can tell you, they're not, obviously they don't have wires. They're wireless. And anything that's wireless is usually operated by some form of radio frequency. You're going to have to find some way, which is going to be tough over there in the White House because there's RF everywhere. You're going to have to find some way to detect the drone first, and they can do that. It has a hum, an acoustic hum, and then you're going to have to find a way to just jam the signal and basically make it float to the ground and
fall from the sky. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no other way. I mean, you can't shoot it down. You're in Washington D.C. Where are the rounds going to go? Whatever you're hitting it with, right. Where's it going to go? So that's the only way.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is that they apparently some of these drones have a GPS capability, and I guess you could jam and confuse their GPS system as well.
They could, but that's right now illegal by federal law to do that. Now, of course, if there was some kind of an override, and then you get to the situation where, Brian, listen, you've reported from the White House, right? Do you know how many, GPS and RF signals and satellites are communicating out in, Pebble Beach and the North Lawn?
Right.
It's not as easy as it sounds. Some of the things the Secret Service does, it's not so much, we can do it or we can't. It's if we do it, what happens to everyone else? I mean,
right.
Yeah, we can knock down the drone. Great. You knock down the whole White House communication system.
Knock out everybody's Wi-Fi for 10 blocks, right?
Yeah, that's not going to have any effect. I say that sarcastically. The press would be in an uproar. So it's not as easy as it sounds. This is a really, really difficult problem for the service.
Well, and Brian was telling me, because if we keep alluding to Brian's knowledge of drones, he is a recreational droner.
I have a couple of drones, and I use them for photography.
Right.
And by the way, I've never flown inside the District of Columbia, inside the Beltway at all,
because it's against the law. But of course, just like gun laws, I mean, the people who mean to do harm don't care what the laws are about guns; they're going to ignore it. Now, Brian tells me that these things can be programmed. You could send one of these drones. You could be like half a mile away,
or a mile and a half away, and you can program it with GPS waypoints and have it fly a determined route.
The guy who sends this drone to the White House could
be a one-way deal.
Could be over already in Virginia before it does anything. So I mean, it seems to me that this is the kind of thing that really, unfortunately, because here's the thing. Let's not just confine it to the White House. You're a Secret Service guy. You could basically try to jam the communications for any public appearance that the president has anywhere, because he is susceptible to a drone.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. When I first saw Brian's got some killer videos, and when he first showed me one of them, ironically, me being a former transportation agent in the Secret Service, I always think motorcades, because motorcades are usually the most dangerous thing we do. You secure a site. It may be, the biggest site we have may be, a half a square mile. A motorcade, you may be looking at 20 miles to secure. You fly a drone over a motorcade, you have some kind of explosive attached to it. You drop it on one of the cars, all of a sudden you got a really serious problem on your hands. So as you said, Larry, it's not just the White House. It's the ability to override that communication with the drone anywhere, that the Secret Service travels. And the motorcades always were the things that kept me up at night. There's just too many unknowns in a motorcade.
Jeez. All right, so you think they're talking over all these things right now over on that 8th floor?
Well, they do these wargaming things with computers, these simulations where they think of really crazy attacks, the kind of things like if you were writing a comic book you'd put in there. I'm sure they've gone through this before. I have some pretty good knowledge of that they've gone through what's going to happen. But, I can guarantee you now the urgency's been stepped up a notch, and someone's asking them right now, what are you doing about this? I
think that's all true, but I hear the other side of that is that, remote control radio aircraft have been around since the 60s. This is not necessarily a new threat. I mean, people could have done this a long time ago with remote control aircraft.
Yeah, they could have, and you certainly could have put a camera on it, but there are some things in place for things like that. The surveillance side doesn't bother me as much as the ability to transport any kind of a weapon or explosive does. Listen, if you can see the motorcade, but you can see it from the street, it's really not, it's not something you'd like, obviously, and there are some plans in place for that. The surveillance side's not as troubling for me as the explosive side. I'll tell you, though, where the surveillance side does bother me. When the technology gets so small that it's beyond detection of the eyeball. You're not just talking about flying now onto the South grounds. You're talking about flying a mosquito-like drone, which is not that far in the future, into the dip room, the diplomatic reception room, and up to the second floor where the president is. And now you're talking about not just a threat, you're talking about the ability to bribe someone. I mean, what do you get? What if you get video of the president picking his nose on the second floor? I mean, we could all laugh, but the truth is, if the technology gets that good that you can't detect it, how do you know that's not going to happen?
That's a good point.
I think the people who are developing those drones work over at Langley, though, quite frankly.
They're not in the Secret Service.
Let's face it, if Hillary Clinton is our next president and Bill is in the White House, picking his nose is the last of our worries.
All right, we'll leave it there. Hey, Dan, thanks so much. Good to have you on.
Thanks, guys. Take care.